The discussion of morality is one that's always sure to turn heads due to its complex connotations within different societal constructs, law enforcement, religious circles, and how this definition has changed and has been defined by various Whoa. Stop. We're not just gonna ignore the elephant in the room, right? You probably clicked on this video because the title or the thumbnail said something outrageous as Luffy is evil. Luffy, the bright-grinned, airheaded rubber man of freedom? That Luffy? No way. Can't be, right? Well, maybe, but maybe not. Every day we navigate events based on concepts that often become so repetitive that they become nothing more than routines and buzzwords. Words like good, evil, what do they even mean to our current sensibilities, and what does it mean in a story like One Piece? So to get a feel for what our main word for today means, I decided to look at the dictionary. I know, revolutionary idea, huh? Anyway, the Cambridge Dictionary defines evil as being morally bad or unpleasant. But that seems vague. It doesn't necessarily say anything definitive on the subject matter. So let's look at a more dumbed down version of the dictionary, the Urban Dictionary. And this describes evil as a force that is negative or destructive. When we piece these definitions together, we somewhat get a feel or an idea for what our convention of what evil is. But can we really say that Luffy, for all intents and purposes, does not fit this in some way? Now, hold that thought, because a lot of you probably answered that question yes anyway. But there is a reason you answered yes. After all, we followed the story where Luffy saves his friends, frees people from slavery with a punch, and even an allegorical parallel for the so-called warrior of liberation. Some would even say that he's the direct inheritor of Joy Boy's will and that he is the sun god. No way he can be evil. Of course not, silly. Well, let me paint you a picture. This is you. Let's say your name's Bob or something, I don't know. You are, somewhat hardworking. You try to give your family the best life you can, put clothes on their back, give them food and shelter. But suddenly a horde of bandits storm your neighborhood, wreck your home, destroy your environment, and want to take your wife away or something. You try to resist and you get struck. So they relent and hey, they let you off easy by taking all your money in your safe. But hey, fear not, all hope isn't lost, because right as they're about to leave, a couple of police officers or soldiers or something, I don't know, they arrive on the scene to fight them off. But these guys who attacked you, they aren't any regular burglars. Oh no, these guys are armed and very much trained and dangerous. And eventually they gain the upper hand on these cops and get away. Things look pretty grim, right? But not to worry, you got your cousin, let's call him Mark, who lives like a couple of miles away, who you can call to help you out for the time being. But hold up, you call Mark and your blood runs cold as he tells you a story that's essentially identical to yours. And then you realize that these people who did this stuff must be very dangerous. And then you start to wonder how people like this are allowed to roam freely. Then you find out that it's not only you. Thousands of people are getting plundered, robbed, and killed all around the city. And it's happening because one man set all these guys free. In your frustration, you curse this person with all your might for suffering and label them as cruel and maybe even evil. The end. Now I know I'm no Homer, so I'm sorry that story took so long to tell, but the picture I just painted is a possible scenario of the average citizen on an island after Luffy's actions had impelled down. Hundreds, maybe even thousands of high-level criminals let loose to run around rampant on multiple islands. Criminals put in a special prison because they couldn't be dealt with by regular people or marines. Free. All because of the selfish action of one man to save his brother, who, also happens to be a criminal. Sounds horrible, I know. Now, we're all good people, right? I mean, I don't know about myself, but I like to think that even if we're not saints, most people who clicked on this video have at least a decent sense of morality and know not to do anything downright stupid or depraved. I hope. So, why did we never stop to think about this, to think about the plight and suffering of these innocent people? You could feel something when I related it to you. You probably would feel something if I gave you a real life equivalent. But why is it something you disregard when it's somewhat blatant in this context? One word: perspective. Perspective is one of the most interesting things to talk about, and I love when authors play around with the concept. In essence, perspectives are the different angles a shape can be looked at. Now, this is a triangle. Let's analyze it. It has 3 angles. Now, what angle caught your attention first? Probably this one, right? Maybe because I put some coloring on it? Well, most stories follow the same reasoning. The most compelling narrative or angle is the one which we follow or focus on for the majority of the story, and that's usually the protagonist angle. Maybe every so often we see a story that, let's say, puts a little bit of color here on this angle and here on this other angle. These would be your secondary protagonists, or as Twitter consumers and my friends affectionately call it, the deuteragonist and the triagonist. But what often happens is that the coloring is so faint that you tend to focus on the first angle in the triangle anyway. What I essentially mean is that the narratives of these other secondary protagonists often become heavily overlapped and non-distinguishable from that of the main character. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, the main character is the main character because they drive the story, they embody the story's themes, and they answer the questions the author creates. Would we like One Piece as much if Usopp was the MC? I'm gonna go ahead and say no. It's a simple logical affirmation. However, this also lends credence to a cognitive bias that makes us automatically associate the protagonist's point of view as the right point of view. And no matter their actions, they essentially are the hero of the story, and their perspective is paramount. Now, the part about the perspective being paramount isn't necessarily wrong, but when you're in a story like One Piece, so much gets lost from this simplistic point of view. Now, remember when I talked about how good buddy the triangle? Yeah, that's most stories. Don't think of One Piece as an octagon. Then add in the moral grayness that comes with Luffy being a pirate in the first place, and that creates a fucking decagon. That's a shape, right? Anyways, One Piece is a story that has one big coloring on one angle, but also other smaller but significant colorings too on other angles. That's why no one thinks of the civilians who got hurt massively by the effects of Luffy's actions and Impel Down. You can go further to talk about Luffy's weakness at Marineford, which somewhat led to Ace's death, which solidified Whitebeard's decision to die at Marineford, leading to many unprotected territories that became subject to more tyrannical rulers, like Big Mom on Fishman Island, who in turn affects the quality of living of the people by demanding outrageous gifts. If you want to get even more diabolical with it, you could go as far as saying that Luffy doing something like freeing Dressrosa wasn't necessarily a good thing. It was just replacing one hierarchy, which, while cruel, had created a system that promoted massive economic growth and wealth, as well as a powerful standing in the world at large, and replacing it with an old patriarchy anyways, that gave the average citizen what you could argue a worse quality of life, and also destroying massive parts of the island. Now, this is a more contentious point, but do you see what I'm getting at? Every action is not as clear-cut as right and wrong as we think it is, but because we're following a certain perspective, over time we have learned to form a cognitive bias for the actions of the characters by rationalizing their actions with part of our own ideals. What got me really thinking about this in the first place was when I read the defeat of Kaido and then watched the King backstory in the anime. Here we have this character who we have a whole arc trying to show us how despicable he is, creating factories that poisons the water, the food of people and kids, killing soldiers, boiling their ruler alive, etc, etc. But we have this great pirate in King looking at this man as essentially a savior. A lot of people caught on to the parallel of Zoro and King, but they don't really look at it deeply. Yeah, Zoro is willing to lay down his dream because of the kind of man Luffy is, but so is King for Kaido. We can empathize more with Zoro because we have followed that perspective and been exposed more to the good things that Luffy has done. But what about Kaido? We don't know much from his side of the story, but from the little we have, if we piece it together, one could argue that Kaido is an inspiration. He essentially came from nothing, and from what we saw, he lived in a war zone and survived years of child abuse and imprisonment, survived as a troll boy on one of the most dangerous groups of individuals ever assembled, escaped cruel experimentation and torture, freed other prisoners, and very likely saved an already endangered race from near extinction. He takes a band of various misfits and gives them purpose, and slowly and steadily walks his way up to become one of the strongest and most respected people ever. whose name is heard around the world. You know Paige and Oti, right? Yeah, their dad died and he took them in and raised them to be healthy, strong adults. Now he's in his prime chasing the dream he's always had as a child, to find the One Piece. Now let's stop for a second. When I put it like that, suddenly Kaido seems less like the monster we perceived and more human. And that extends with many other figures in One Piece. And we see characters like Monet give their lives for characters we've designated as irredeemable and pure evil, like Doflamingo, and say with their dying breath that they know that he's gonna be the Pirate King. Is it because they're fanatics, or do they genuinely believe deep in their hearts that they're fulfilling deeper purpose? The story of One Piece is a decagon, hell, maybe even another shape with more angles than I can pronounce right now, that shows you so many angles, so many scenarios, so many perspectives. Every character doesn't just exist to make up One Piece. A lot of them have a One Piece story of their own. So then that begs the question, is it fair to judge the story with our own moral sensibilities? A lot of people hate Squad, the white bear associate, and understandably so. I mean, first off, the dude is bar ugly, but also he hurts a much beloved character and possibly indirectly leads to his later death. But Squad was holding on to past trauma connected to Roger. A lot of us know Roger and we like him, but Roger killed a man's entire crew for a simple joke at his men's expense. Those men could have had wives, kids. I mean, Squad is a white-beard associate, so I could assume that he very likely wasn't even what you'd consider a chaotic pirate by our own moral standards. So perhaps he and his men were adventurers, dream seekers, flying the pirate flag to seek freedom in a world where freedom is few and far between. And then boom, one single antagonistic force dims that light in mere seconds. Goldie Roger. To us, we will never be able to see Roger in that negative of a light. That's not our truth, but that is very much Squad's reality. So then, is it fair to relate our own moral sensibilities to these characters? In a story about piracy, the moral line is far stretched thin as it is, and when the perspective we are meant to follow is that of a pirate, it's somewhat naive to blindly follow trying to classify these characters based on our own pre-existing biases, and creating cognitive biases of them by trying to make them fit into our own sensibilities. Now, what I've always liked about Luffy is his self-awareness. He has never claimed to be a hero, and constantly reiterates his dream to be the man who doesn't want to control anything, but to be the freest man on the seas. A lot of people do not see the inherent oxymoron that exists within this though, as the freest man is also the greediest, because that level of freedom also encroaches into others' boundaries, whether imposed or subsidiary. This isn't a man who is perfect, he's just a man with a burning desire to fulfill his dream. When Usopp asks Rayleigh to tell them about the One Piece, Luffy vehemently rejects, not because it wouldn't help, but because he sees it as a disservice to piracy and the people who risk their lives to set sail. In other words, he doesn't see himself as a special messiah who's worthy of special treatment or whose perspective must be favored as the best. He sees himself as a pirate like any other, whose conviction, not moral code or identity, will make him succeed. But again, I'd like to think none of you are stupid. I mean, if you watch this far, you definitely aren't. So there is a reason why we continue to see Luffy in this way, as this sort of messianic figure that liberates and is always on the right path. Since the inculcation of Gear 5, so many people have settled with the idea of Luffy being some child of destiny, the carrier of Joy Boy's will, the boy of prophecy that will bring the world out of the clutches of the big bad world government, right? Well, in all this hubris has been lost the fact that Luffy himself is still, Luffy. He's still that simple-minded, freedom-oriented individual who fights for himself first and what he believes in. He's not a savior or a hero, let alone a messiah. Many people have expected him to have an eventual coming to Jesus moment where he accepts his role as Joy Boy and saves the world. But why? Is this because this is consistent with what the story shows us? Or is it because we have filled in invisible gaps that exist within our own cognitive biases? Have we positive tuned every action of Luffy to fit into our own idea of the hero and the traditional roles? When I show many people this panel, for instance, they don't even realize that it's real. Do they even recognize where it's from? Why do you think that is? And this isn't me saying Luffy is gonna be on some fuck the world, I don't care timing. But instead of just expecting a simple, yeah, Luffy is gonna accept himself as a messiah, maybe we should be expecting a more divisive response. Maybe one that stays consistent to who Luffy is. Himself. Not Joy Boy, not Roger, not even the Sun God. Just himself. Monkey D. Luffy. Even if that makes him evil. So I've said all this, but you may still be curious. Well, is Luffy evil or not then? The answer is, it's up to you to reevaluate and decide. And confirm for yourself if you're okay with that moving forward. I'm sure many of you aren't satisfied with that answer. So I'll leave you with this to think about instead. In a story like One Piece, even if we don't dim our own moral spectrum, we could still somewhat see Luffy as just, or at least a necessary evil in the face of the far worse world government adversary. However, is this really the case? Doflamingo establishes in Marineford that the winner decides what justice is. If you notice, the first chapter of One Piece is narrated as though it is a story being retold, the beginning of a story of fate. Now, is the story of Luffy a story of good triumphing over evil? Or maybe, just maybe, is it the story where evil was strong enough to win and able to rewrite good?